Have you ever heard a story so tragic, so mysterious, that even more than 100 years later, people are still asking the same haunting question? How could the unsinkable Titanic sink? A ship so grand, so powerful, so modern for its time, was declared the safest vessel ever built. They said not even God himself could sink it. But just 4 days into its maiden voyage, Titanic was lying at the bottom of the cold Atlantic, taking more than 1,500 souls with her. Was it just fate? Or were there human mistakes so big, so costly, that the mighty Titanic never stood a chance? Tonight, we go back in time to that dark April night of 1912 and uncover 6 big mistakes that sank the unsinkable Titanic. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The largest moving object man had ever created, 11 stories high, nearly 3 football fields long, glowing with the lights of electricity at a time when many towns were still lit by candles. First-class passengers dined on fine china with music playing in grand halls. Ordinary people in third class, immigrants chasing a dream of a better life, were packed deep below decks, sleeping in tiny bunks. But all of them believed one thing: this ship was safe, no fear, no doubt, just excitement for the journey ahead. Yet destiny had already written another story, the first mistake. Arrogance. From the very beginning, Titanic carried a dangerous belief. The shipbuilders and the White Star Line wanted to impress the world. They wanted to prove that their ship was not just the biggest, but also the safest. Newspapers called it unsinkable. The company never officially used that exact word, but they did everything to feed that idea. When people think nothing can go wrong, they stop preparing for the worst. That arrogance set the stage for disaster. Because on the night Titanic hit the iceberg, safety drills were never practiced. Lifeboats were not filled properly, and many passengers believed they were safer staying on board than sitting in a small boat in the middle of the dark ocean. That first mistake, believing nothing could touch the Titanic, was like planting a seed of tragedy. Now let's talk about the second mistake. Not enough lifeboats. You see, Titanic could carry over 200 passengers and crew. But it only had 20 lifeboats. Even if every single one was filled to capacity, only about half the people on board could survive. Why so few? The original design allowed for many more lifeboats, but they were removed. Why? Because the owners thought the deck would look too cluttered. They didn't want anything to spoil the beauty of the ship. The regulations at the time were also outdated. They measured lifeboat requirements by ship weight, not by the number of passengers. Titanic was nearly 3 times bigger than those rules were ever designed for, but no one updated the law. So, when disaster struck, lifeboats became the difference between life and death, and more than 1,000 people had no chance at all, because there was simply no space for them. Imagine the fear of standing on that sinking ship, watching boats lower into the sea, knowing there would never be one for you. That was the cruel reality many faced. The third mistake: speed. Titanic was racing across the Atlantic. Captain Edward Smith wanted to make headlines by arriving in New York ahead of schedule. The ship was moving at about 22 knots, nearly top speed, even though warnings about icebergs had been coming in all day. Other ships had slowed down, some even stopped for the night, but Titanic pressed on through the darkness. Captain Smith, a man with decades of experience, ignored the danger. He trusted the ship too much. And when the iceberg appeared, there was simply no time. At that speed, a vessel of Titanic's size could not turn quickly enough. The collision became unavoidable. If they had been slower, maybe they could have seen the iceberg sooner. Maybe they could have turned in time, but pushing forward at full speed through dangerous waters was a gamble, and it cost more than 1,500 lives. The fourth mistake: the iceberg warning messages. Throughout April 14th, Titanic received at least 6 warnings from other ships in the area. One ship, the Californian, had even stopped for the night because the ice was so bad. They tried to warn Titanic. But here's the shocking part. the wireless radio operators were so busy sending personal messages for wealthy passengers that they didn't treat the warnings as urgent. One critical message never even reached the bridge. Hours later, when Titanic was sinking, the Californian was just miles away, close enough to save hundreds, but their wireless operator had gone to bed. When Titanic sent desperate calls for help, no one answered. A mistake of timing, of communication, that turned a rescue into silence. Think about it. A ship full of lifeboats sat not too far away, while Titanic's passengers froze in the dark. Help was so close. Yet it never came. The fifth mistake, the watertight compartments. Titanic was praised for its engineering. It had 16 watertight compartments designed to keep it afloat even if 4 flooded. People thought this made the ship indestructible. But there was a flaw. The bulkheads, the walls between compartments, didn't go all the way up. They stopped just a few feet above the waterline. So, when the Iceberg tore open the hull, water spilled over from one compartment into the next, like filling an ice tray. One after another, the ship's sections flooded. Titanic was designed to survive some damage, but not the kind it faced that night. Engineers later said that if the Iceberg had struck straight on, crushing the front but only damaging a few compartments, the ship might have survived. Instead, the side was ripped open and water poured in unstoppable. What was called a marvel of safety turned out to be a trap. And then, the sixth mistake, chaos during evacuation. When the order finally came to load the lifeboats, confusion ruled the decks. Passengers didn't believe the ship was really sinking. Crew members weren't trained properly. Some boats left half empty. The very first lifeboat, built to hold over 60 people, was lowered with just 28. Others floated away carrying only a handful. Meanwhile, hundreds of men, women, and children were left waiting, still hoping they would be saved. The band kept playing, the lights flickered, and the great ship slowly tilted into darkness. Panic grew too late. By the time people realized the truth, there were no boats left. The rest were forced to jump into the freezing sea, where death came in minutes. The evacuation was not just poorly managed, it was a disaster within a disaster. Think about these 6 mistakes together: arrogance, too few lifeboats, dangerous speed, ignored warnings, flawed design, and chaotic evacuation. Each one alone might not have doomed Titanic, but together they formed a chain of disaster that nothing could break. One by one, they sealed the fate of the ship and everyone aboard. But there's something even deeper about this story. Titanic was not just a ship, it was a symbol of human pride, of believing we had mastered nature. In 1912, the world was racing forward with new inventions, new machines, new dreams. People thought technology could protect them from anything. Titanic was the crown jewel of that belief. Yet, in just a few hours, the ocean proved us wrong. Steel, electricity, luxury, none of it mattered against the cold power of nature. As the ship's stern lifted high into the night sky and the mighty vessel broke apart, passengers screamed, prayed, and held on to loved ones. Some kissed their children goodbye, some sang hymns, others fell silent, staring into the endless black water, knowing it was the end. Survivors later spoke of the sound, the terrible cries of hundreds drowning, a sound so haunting it never left their memories. And then, silence, just silence, under the stars. The Titanic now rests 2 miles below the surface, broken, rusting, swallowed by the sea. But the lessons it left behind still echo, that no machine is truly unsinkable. That human pride can blind us to danger, and that even the greatest marvels of man are fragile against the forces of nature. 6 mistakes sank the Titanic, but the greatest mistake of all was believing it could never sink. And maybe that is why the story of Titanic will never die, because it's not just about a ship, it's about us, our dreams, our pride, our tragedies. The Titanic reminds us of the price of arrogance, the danger of ignoring warnings, and the fragile line between life and death. 100 years have passed, but that night still whispers across the ocean, asking us to remember the unsinkable sank, and the world was never the same again.